Good morning again, and thank you very much for joining us. Hope everybody's had some breakfast and, most importantly, some coffee. I'm delighted to be here with Keith Williams, who I think since for more than a decade, since 2005, has been president and CEO of UL, who are partners with us on the forum. Keith, just to kick us off, for people in the room who don't know UL's history and background, give us the 1 minute.
Happily, it's more than a minute, but UL started in Chicago in 1894. We really were an outgrowth of the 1893 World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition, and it was one of the first big global expositions of electricity, and there were a lot of problems with fire related to the electricity. So the insurance industry, who had a lot at risk, brought in an engineer from MIT. He started a program of safety testing, and which eventually led to certification, which essentially made the World's Fair much safer, saved the insurance companies a lot of money. And then the insurance company said, you know, this would be a really good thing to do more broadly, because it would reduce our risk. We would pay out less money for injury, for death, for property loss. Follow the money always works.
Yep.
And I think it's a good model for what's happening in smart cities today, because electricity, 1894, there was a lot of reluctance and fear about the technology, of what it would bring because of electric shock and risk of fire. And they solved that problem. They speeded up the adoption of technology. I think we have the same thing right now with smart cities.
Take that analogy to the smart cities, between electricity and smart cities a little further. What is the fire risk today?
Well, it's what we have today is the cities are becoming increasingly smart, even though we may be less than fully aware of it. For example, though, if you're standing down on Michigan Avenue at a bus stop waiting for a bus, it's got a nice little LED display that tells you the next 4 buses that are coming, what's the bus number, how many minutes to arrive. There's smart technology all over the city, and yet it has a significant potential risk, which is related to cybersecurity, to hacking. We saw just in late March, the city of Atlanta was shut down, virtually shut down the city government for about 5 days due to a ransomware attack. You know, no Wi-Fi at the airport, people couldn't pay their water bills, electric bills, couldn't report potholes. 8,000 city workers were told to leave their computers turned off. So that kind of a risk is starting to grow up because we're becoming more and more reliant on technology.
So how do you see these smart cities evolving? There's always this balance between innovation and safety, isn't there? And in many ways, kind of regulation is often seen as a damper on innovation, and standards are seen as slowing these things down. Do you see smart cities evolving in a safer way, if you like, than the electricity industry of the 1880s?
Well, first, I think standards more likely accelerate as opposed to retard acceptance of technology. And I'll give you a simple example and come back to smart cities. You may remember 3 years ago probably that the hot Christmas product was a hoverboard.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to have a hoverboard, and many hoverboards were sold. None of them were safety tested. None of them had standards of certification. And then in the U.S. alone, there were more than 100 homes that were lost to fires. And the airlines said, okay, no more hoverboards on airplanes. Public spaces said no more hoverboards. There was a major recall, which was about $200 million worth of hoverboards that were recalled. And then there were standards, and then there was testing, and now hoverboards are fine.
Yeah.
I think, you know, that same analogy can apply in smart cities in terms of cities are becoming progressively smart, like autonomous driving. You know, we're all waiting for a switch to be flipped and have a smart taxi that will pick us up and take us back to the Park Hyatt. But actually, autonomy is coming in gradually in ways that we fail to notice. We started with cruise control in our car, and then radar cruise control, and then self-parking, and then lane keeping assistance, and lane changing assistance, and technology to wake you up if you fall asleep, and now technology that will allow your car to drive itself automatically in our traffic jams, which we need in Chicago. And the cars are becoming progressively autonomous, and we really don't notice that. The same thing is happening in cities. Cities are becoming progressively smart,
Right.
as opposed to instantly smart or quantumly smart. And one day we're going to wake up and some city in the world will be the first one to become self-aware, kind of like Skynet and Terminator.
The self-aware city, I think it will be a threat
Coming.
to many of the mayors in the audience. But so is that? Do you see risk in that incrementalism, that it isn't as though we suddenly say on June the 30th the city becomes smart? It's that we go step by step, and we don't really notice, we don't intervene in those steps until it's too late to impose standards and certification.
You know, I think incremental smartness or incremental autonomy is better because we can learn from every step along the way.
Right.
The thing we're missing right now in smart cities and smart buildings everywhere in the world are standards of interoperability. So if you were in a brand new high-rise building in downtown Chicago, I would guess you have thousands of smart, self-aware devices in the building, from appliances to fire control systems to building protection, energy management, all of those things. What's missing is the ability for those things to talk to each other, and then for that smart building to talk to the smart building next door,
Yeah.
and for all of those to talk to the city, to tell for example, to tell the highway system or the train system, hey, people are leaving work early 15 minutes today, it looks like, because there's a lot more traffic in the elevators, a lot more traffic on the escalators. Maybe you want to think about adjusting traffic patterns or train patterns. That's still missing.
What will it take to bring those standards of interoperability in?
It's going to require a collaboration between industry and governments, maybe some people like UL who can be a facilitator, to bring together a dialogue to say, let's develop a standard for interoperability. And I think it has to be global, at least it has to be national.
Right.
It has to involve industry because industry has all the knowledge and they have all the products and they have the ability to make it happen.
Are there parts of that the city itself can lead? Because from a national point of view, if the smart cities are a subset of the national concern, is it realistically going to have to be put on the national agenda by city governments?
I think, yes, it has to be put on the agenda by city governments because, we're going to have, if you think about America, we're going to have smart cities before we have a smart nation. So Chicago will probably become a smart city before America becomes a smart nation, simply because it's so big and we have so much empty space. So yes, I think cities have a key role to play.
That's where all of the urbanites among us feel a little better about ourselves. What role does data play in how you at UL and how we all should identify the risks in smart cities?
Well, the world today is all about data. If you look at the most valuable companies on earth these days, they're mostly data plays as opposed to physical infrastructure companies. And data in cities, I think, will be equally valuable and can be useful in lots of ways. An example I like to use, University of Maryland, we do a lot of work with them. They have a traffic engineering program, which plays right into smart cities. One of the issues in cities is overloaded trucks damaging roadways and bridges. And so if you drive around America, you'll find weigh stations where the trucks have to stop, they have to be weighed, they have to go back on their way. It's very inefficient for commerce and also very inefficient for city governments. University of Maryland, through their traffic engineering program, has developed real-time sensors that are implanted in the roadways. And the trucks just drive over the sensors, they're automatically weighed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, you still need a police officer to stop and ticket an overweight truck. That said, the city and now the state of Maryland has real-time extensive data and a heat map that will tell them, okay, you've got the highest probability of a violation between 3 and 4 o'clock on Tuesday. Yeah. So if you want to send your police out to look for high violators of weight problems, send them out then. That's the way cities are using data and states are using data, which makes them smart, but in a unique way.
You started off by talking about following the money. What are the financial incentives here for smart cities and for the companies within them to really move towards the standard setting that you say is going to be necessary?
Well, I think one of the challenges for governments everywhere is insufficient resource. And the same thing is true in lots of companies, of course. And I think one of the things that intelligence in smart cities will do is free up resource. An example, we have a company here in Chicago, one of our local startups, Catalytic, that's developing process automation technology, which is really back office stuff. How do you onboard an employee? How do you create an email address? How do you manage performance appraisals in an automated way? You know, sounds kind of mundane. When we think about automation, we usually think about factory automation. And having said that, about 6 months ago, Deutsche Bank announced that they believe that process automation will, in the medium term, eliminate half of their white-collar employment. If you bring that money back to the city and say, wait a minute, if we can use process automation, smart city technology to replace a lot of manual activity that we're doing that's really no value added, then what can we do with that resource to solve a lot of the other problems that the city has that really does require physical resource, which is in short supply?
Can you give us just some examples of areas where, parts of the smart city that UL does touch already, and where you've made progress in starting to implement some of these standards? Are we seeing standards being set around data sets, around smart grids, around smart buildings?
Well, a couple examples. One, we test and certify building fire alarm and security systems. And so if you go into most large high-rise buildings in downtown Chicago, you'll probably see in the lobby a big fire control and emergency management panel, which would be UL certified and certified to UL standards. But beyond that, then, we have developed and deployed already a couple standards for cybersecurity, because that's the next big risk. And the first standards, one of those was around electrical control devices, power control devices, and that's going to become more and more of kind of a building block, I would say, of a smart city.
Right.
Because cyber is a major risk, and if your city gets shut down for 5 days, it's no longer a smart city.
The cyber risk is such a sprawling risk for a smart city. There are so many ways in to the system.
Yes.
Is it possible to close down all of those avenues, or to have any confidence that you've set the kind of standards that can reduce that risk?
Well, that's the interesting challenge for our business, because historically our business was based on risks that are based in physics and chemistry. The physics and chemistry of fire and electricity are immutable. The risks of cyber are mutating hourly, every minute. And so it's a continually evolving risk. And so therefore it's going to be a much bigger challenge. That said, I think one of the major risks is controllable, and that is people themselves. And I think most of the time these days when a cyber attack happens, for example, a ransomware attack that hit the city of Atlanta, it was more likely because someone opened an email attachment than because someone figured out a way to hack into their system. So we need both. We need really good training of people to be cyber aware. We need standards and technology that can make products cyber safe, which we're doing a lot of. And then we need cities and national governments to work together on legislation and on law enforcement and on prosecution of criminals, because most of these cyber attacks are happening that are cross-border.
So we started talking about fire. I want to end on the same subject, actually. There's a wonderful piece in the FT today from a colleague of mine in London on the first anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire, which I'm sure most of you remember. It's this tower block in the middle of London, quite a poor community in a very wealthy neighborhood, just lit up shockingly fast and at a great human toll. Now, UL is involved in the investigation of what went wrong, I understand.
Yes, we are.
One of the striking things about Grenfell was how it scarred London, not just physically, but just in terms of its self-image. London thinks of itself as a very smart city. Here's this really awful incident that makes people question city policies and whether the city is taking care of its citizens. are we still not cracking these 125-year-old problems while we're trying to think about the problems of the next 5 to 10 years?
I'll give you a statistic. In the U.S., over the last 100 years, the per capita fire death rate has gone down by 90%.
Right.
We have about 3,500 people a year in the U.S. who die in fires. We have 35,000 people a year who die in vehicle crashes. So yeah, I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think at the same time Grenfell reinforces the importance for cities to still pay attention to the basic infrastructure and routine matters, because fire is always going to be a hazard.
It's a great moment on which to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.